Jumping right back in with the second Rings of Power installment. In this episode, we're seeing a little bit more in the way of studio-based shots that are interwoven into some of the bigger, wider scenes. See what you think. Drop some comments down below. This is going to be a CGI shot. Whether he's CGI character in the foreground, or whether they've comped him in, or whether this is real with some degree of kind of matte painting CGI, you know, just bringing in all of that background and the light. Hard to say, but looks really cool. Obviously, in this series, there is going to be a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of CGI. There has to be in order to pull together some of the things that they need. But how much they're actually using is hard to say. I was less of a fan of this shot. It felt like a bit of a throwaway thing where they're trying to do something that feels like something from the Silmarillion, but kind of isn't, but kind of is. And yeah, lighting-wise, framing-wise, it was just a bit of a placeholder, a bit of a filler. They are being lit up, so the light is coming up at them, and that is catching right underneath his chin. You can see it's catching all the way underneath his arm, just here. So there's some source in the middle of the room which is kind of blasting up at them, and then there is a little bit of something that they've got coming in just to edge him a little bit. They haven't bothered so much on the guys on the side just here, but he is getting a tiny little bit of edge light, probably just to make him more prominent and keep our eye focused on him, because he is one of the characters that we're meant to be watching for this bit. Another beautiful CGI shot. They're all going off to fight Vecna. 11 is in there somewhere. And then we get something which instantly feels a little bit more akin to things that we have seen in Lord of the Rings. Big battle scene. And there's two color temperatures of light going on here, justified by fire in the background. We've got lots of warm tones pushing in from this direction. Everything's being doused with rain, so we have a lot of kind of atmospheric elements going on. They're all wet, which means there's a lot of specular highlights going on. So taking a look at this guy's helmet, for example, you can see they're catching the light that is above just here. And I'd say that we've got some kind of, it doesn't even have to be a big source, because some of those lines are pretty stark. He's getting something more frontal, and I'd say you get something off to the side just here, blasting in, covering this area, catching our main elf man. I forget his name. I'm not going to remember anyone's name. I know Galadriel's name because I watched Lord of the Rings a few times, but yeah. He's getting that. It's a really hard light on him. We're catching some of that also on the armor and the swords. You know, his sword is glistening just there in the wet. We also catch it on helmets that are in the background. You know, circles like that. That's why they use reflective circles when they're doing VFX to see what the light was doing. They kind of tell you that there was a spotlight on this person just here. There was a soft source over this side. So all of this warmth is coming from a source over here, and we've got that just pushing towards his arm. Softer source for that, and it does seem to fill in his face somewhat on this side as well. So we've got a warm soft source on the one side, we've got the cooler source coming in and just dominating this side really, really hard. And then contrast with that, we have elements of, I'm going to do this in yellow, elements of contrast with the shadows of swords and war machinery and pikes and lances and whatever in the scene at large. And then behind that, you are getting these pops of light coming through with the rain and torches and everything, just to give it depth, to make it feel chaotic, to really sell the scale and the epicness of this shot. What's interesting here is that we're not treating our main character at this point with a more beautiful light. He's getting a really cold, hard light, and it pings in his eyes just there. You can really see that zinging light, the massive shadow from that all down here, shadows around his mouth, shadows under his chin, picking up across even his forehead just there. I'm making him look crazy, but all of that pushing in, and then loads of fill from this side just to put the warmth in there all down the side of his face, but that's fire, so it's not good warmth. All of that done, we're into something a little bit more traditional, because everything we've seen so far has been a highly stylized interpretation of what light does, what the world looks like, because we've been in the elves' homeland. And then we've been on a battlefield, and that is, again, highly stylized. Here, it's more like in Lord of the Rings when they're, chasing down the Uruk-hai who have taken the hobbits to Isengard, where you are getting a big helicopter shot, maybe it's a drone shot, and there isn't any magic other than picking the time of day, picking the framing, getting the camera settings right, staging in your talent, and then running the scene. Where before everything was a little bit more magical, this feels much more realistic, if you like. So we've got light coming from this side, probably going to say that is the sun, and that sunlight is then just pushing across the scene like so, and that is giving you those little shadows just there. It's not rocket science, it's a snowy landscape, so in order to get contrast on the snow and actually have it look good, you do need a little bit of directional light. If you've ever filmed on snow, even if you've ever skied or anything like that, you'll know that if it's a really cloudy down kind of day, it's overcast, and the slope is really hard to read because you don't get the contrast on the snow to see where there are divots and moguls, and it just gives it shape and form in a way which really helps us to know that they're in a nice snowy landscape. You can see so much detail just of little drifts and imperfections on the surface there, and then obviously we also have the route that they have taken across as a thing as well. So the direction of the sun is incredibly important for something like this, and having that sun there really sells the shot. Clearly you can look for other things, like maybe we want some wispy clouds in the background, maybe we want some rocks to help give a little bit of weight to the frame and make it seem a little bit more perilous. So all of that adds to it, but you've got to pick the right time of day, and you've got to get your camera in the right place and get a nice frame. After that very realistic shot, we move on to, again, something which feels far more magical. It's going to be a shorthand for this. Sun is in frame just here, and we can see a good amount of edge on Galadriel just there. Our other talent is also catching that. And then quite a lot of return, quite a lot of cool return. Everything is taking on a very blue hue just here. Now you could get this just with what the weather is giving you, but a lot of the time you're going to have to augment things. Whether they have just here or not is hard to say, and whether this is even a real frame is hard to say, because if you're up a mountain at sunset, it would be hard to do as a production. Going up the mountain at sunset to get this shot, so time dependent. It's so time dependent. I question whether this is actually faked, because it doesn't feel quite as grounded and real as the last one. But maybe it is real. Anyway, what I wanted to point out here is we jump and put Galadriel's on the left of frame, Jimmy the elf is on the right, And then we jump, Galadriel's on the right, Jimmy's on the left. Now, that would be a reverse shot, and you can legit do a reverse shot. The challenge with it just here as a reverse shot is that this actually jumps across the 180. Fine, it's a reverse shot. But then we also switch the backlight to be on the backside again. So we jump and have the sun coming from this direction, probably, because that's catching on her hair just there. I think we can all agree that's quite bright, and he's catching a lot down the side of his face. I'd say less so, actually, for the people in the background, which is interesting, and kind of means maybe they did bring in a light source just to do that. But then she's also got pinging in her eyes something off to the side just over here, which is giving her quite a lot of definition on her face. You know, it's not as low as I've drawn it just there, actually. I'd say that's actually probably quite a lot higher up. You can deduce the angle just by what's going on around her chin, so you kind of got something coming in like that, because that's the angle that we have on the chin shadow just there. I've just wind that back a little bit, actually. You can kind of see that going on just there. And then in her eyes, this is the first time we got a really, really clear view of what the source is, and that looks like a LED panel. Probably quite a big one, but yeah, it feels a bit more horizontal. It's more that kind of classic 2x1 shape, like that, rather than a square, which is interesting. So that is what's keying her, and our guy in the back's probably catching some of that too. And then I think they have just brought in another light to do everything for her hair just there, because he feels like he's not getting it quite the same way. The people in the background aren't quite getting it in the same way. So I think this is more sculpted, shaped, finessed. From there we jump again. Galadriel was on the right of frame here, and Jimmy the Elf was on the left. And now Galadriel is on the left and Jimmy is on the right, and lo and behold, the sunlight has jumped back to that original position. So now the sun is coming in from this side and catching him pretty hard down the side of his face just there. You know, we've got a pretty clear cut down the side. It's not wrapping elegantly around for him. We can see some catching her hair just there. We're lighting up the whole side of the mountain in the background also. So all of that, and then his downside is still getting quite a lot of fill, you know. So we are pushing something back into him just here. I don't think we can particularly see any light source, so just something big and soft, just pushing back in, and really cool. Moving into the closer shot for this, we do, if we zoom into his eyes, see a square in there. Squares aren't particularly natural shapes, so you can assume that this is a frame of some description somewhere around here, just to push a little bit more back up into his eyes and his face than perhaps they were getting, but still on the downside of his face just there. Really cool, similar push to before. Going to jump to Galadriel, but what we're going to do is look at his eyes for a moment. His eyes are sort of in the middle of his eye socket, and that means his head is facing Galadriel and his eyes are looking at her. Probably her eyes, you know, that's where people look. Then if we look at her, she has her head off to the side a little bit, and she's looking back at him. Now, the narrative reasons for this notwithstanding, from a camera and lighting point of view, by turning her into that light source a little bit more, you're going to open up her face a bit and help it to wrap around a bit. So where he felt more cut down the middle, as if he's lit on one side and not on the other, she's actually getting a little bit more wrap. Now they may have wrapped it round a little bit more for her, but by turning you naturally do that. So she has a slightly different vibe with the lighting there because of that. So her head is turned a little bit this way. Her eyes are back in her eye sockets this way, and then she's looking out to him. So that maneuver has implications for what she's thinking, because she's kind of looking at him a little bit side on, like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. He's looking at her very earnestly. We've got to turn back, dead on. So narrative plays a part for that direction of your talent. You know, we're not going to be there as DOP saying, oh yeah, no, we should turn them more into the light because this and that. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but there's probably a narrative reason for it as well. But if you have free reign and you can block it in such a way that helps you, just turning in a little bit to the light helps. I would say you can see right in the top of her eyes just there, something a little bit harder. So it feels like there is another edge just up here firing in, and then there's something more over here just pushing in as well. And then she's still getting the cool blue downness just there. Worth mentioning this, all of the down area just here, bring in a big floppy, put it over the top, adjust it to taste, and you've got a artfully out of focus silhouette with a little bit of definition if you get it right, so you can tell it's your talent. It doesn't look weird in shot. It might feel weird the first few times you do it, but it's a really good trick to learn. I was on a shoot today, early start, that's why I'm croaky, and we did exactly this. We had a line of floppies in our case because we were trying to do two-person coverage. So we had 3 floppies out, capping over the top of them a little bit, and that just puts a more of a downside on them so that when you're over the shoulder, it doesn't feel so distracting having the person's ear in shot. Personally, I do find it super distracting when you just see brightly lit ears in shot. I don't want to dwell on this one too much, just wanted to call attention to the composition and the way it's lit. So you've got, I guess that's all I do. So you've got areas in the background which have this cool blue light coming in, plenty of that catching icicles and just catching the tops of rocks and all of this. So there's a general top push happening there, but then also these areas where they have actually specifically lit something, and then the top push just fills in the rest. By doing that, you create layers, you create points of interest. If you just had the backlights, if you just had the top lights, you wouldn't get that same depth. And then to enhance that, the light in the back is cooler. They're obviously here with torches. So all of their torches are playing on them. How much the torch is playing versus if there's a push happening. I'd say the torches probably are playing quite a lot here, because if there's a push happening as well, you'd catch so much more. You'd catch it in the rocks and all kinds that you didn't want to. So I'd say that a lot of what they're getting from the torches is from the torches. It could be that they've replaced these in post, of course, and it's an LED light on a stick just going boom, 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 giving loads of flickery goodness at a higher level, a little bit more control, a little bit safer. They haven't got talent wandering around with fire in their hands. And by doing that, we get a lovely layered frame of warm in the foreground, some silhouettes happening just to create a cut around everything. They're quite silhouetted, and they're striding through all this snow, and there's a little bit of haziness at the bottom of the frame. And then you've got all of the cool tones in the back and lots of shapes and forms highlighted with, like I say, those little bits of top light and things, just to give it depth and vibe. Galadriel busts through this. We have an interesting scenario here where actually the fire is the main light, so she's holding the torch, and it really does feel like it's torchlight that is illuminating her face. Now they may have a big bit of white off to the side just here, just to fill that in, or maybe they're bouncing a bit of light into it just to enhance it, but it does play in her eye as well, so that looks cool. But the rest of it, lovely, through a window, through a gap, frame within a frame, super cool. We get another version of this where Galadriel's got a little bit of a cool top light happening. So we've got this big push from the back and the top, helps to pick her out against the gloom back there. We do have some little bits of light, but where you have big black spaces like this, just cutting people out goes a long way. If we didn't have that, it would just be the torchlight on a face, and then it's just a face floating around in black gloom. It also helps to pick out her sword all along here as well, and a little bit of a shoulder line. So it does a lot, and really, you know, an LED matte up on a boom arm, just position it over the talent, dialed it down a little bit cool. Then we got the warmth coming from this torch, and her nose shadow dances around a little bit, and we've got it's kind of a hard nose shadow as well. So that is the torch, light on her face coming from the torch. It all makes sense, and then you got the shadow in just here. So cool. Be fascinated to find out if that is real or not. I feel like in some of these close-ups that they do, it goes to the extreme, because in this close-up we have one eye in focus and one eye out of focus. This happens quite a lot actually throughout the first couple of episodes, where the focus is so shallow you have one eye in and one eye out, and it gives it a vibe, and it's like people looking and focusing, and you're seeing that, you're seeing focus either happening or not in the camera as well. So cool, but it could be an odd thing, and you should always be careful with it, because if you do it wrong, then it just looks like you didn't get it right. You did. Good time to talk about T-stops, f-stops, whatever you want to call it. You set your depth of field with that. So the lens that you're using, the T-stop that you're using, and the distance of the subject to the camera is what's going to determine how much of your subject is in focus at any given time. So because you have, it's not sensor, it's lenses, it's not sensor. Talk about it another time. It's not the sensor. It is the sensor in a roundabout kind of way, but it's also not. It's lenses. So because of all of that, you can use your T-stop to set how much of your character is in focus. So in this scenario, this very thing, you could bring more light in theory, and set a higher T-stop. Let's say they're at 2.8 or 1.4 here. If they went to f8, then you'd probably find that you had a fighting chance of keeping both the eyes in focus. Maybe you go to f11. Maybe you go to a wider lens, so you get a deeper depth of field with it. If you are setting your T-stop purely for lighting, if you're setting your T-stop purely because you don't have enough light, then that can cause you issues. That is probably not what they're doing here at all, because they do it several times throughout the first couple of episodes in a stylistic fashion. But if you are at home watching this and you're setting your T-stop to T1.4 because that is what gets you exposure, then consider, and I appreciate this is all relative to what fixtures you have and what you can do with the crew that you've got, consider you might need to up your levels, because a lot of the time I want to set my T-stop at a certain point because that's what I want for the depth of field in the shot. And to get that T-stop, I need to, more often than not, bring in more light. Now, it's a luxury to get a deep depth of field shot, and we have very sensitive cameras now, so that luxury is becoming easier to achieve. But if you look back, I don't know, like at The Shining, where they wanted tons of deep depth of field, where you think deep depth of field looks cheap. Maybe it does, but it isn't cheap to do in terms of lighting. If you want to get a really deep depth of field, you've got to light everything, and you've got to light it to a very high T-stop. And if you don't, then it's going to look rubbish. This is just interesting because it's something which you would see a lot in people's work starting out, where they have one eye in focus, one eye out of focus. Moving image, you get away with it when people are moving around, and you know, it is its own thing. Stills photography can look super weird. It really can be very distracting. Anyway, The other thing I would say here is that the source is a little bit squarer. So it feels like this, bring in an LED, set that up, get that shot, and you've got that blue haze in her hair, and then just a cool blue push. That feels like, I said haze just a moment ago, I meant her hair looks all hazy and blue, but there feels like there's haze or atmosphere in the background that's catching the light. So you're not getting black, you're getting a slightly higher IRE reading of blue coolness. And you've got her determined look, and then it all goes off to darkness on this side because there isn't light on that side. They're in a cave. We've got light on this side. We're holding the torch just there. We've got our random blue push from behind. So yeah, of course, wraps around, but that's good. This is just more of the same. We've got their torches, super bright in shot, and you can see that is actually playing across onto the water that she's pouring on. Hers does play obviously all across her bracer just there, and his is taking care of him. Blue populates the background, so we've got all of these little catches, some kind of top push just down onto all of this. I wouldn't say that it would have to be super soft, it just has to be controlled. So it's going into all of this detail in the forge or whatever it is just there in the background, and it'll also playing on their hair, although I feel like that is something else over here that's been put in specifically for that purpose, and then this is all another source. If you're doing this and you're trying to do it with one thing and trying to keep contrast, you're going to run into a lot of trouble because a big top source, it's just going to go everywhere. So a couple of smaller sources gridded, positioned discreetly exactly over what you want. So you would have maybe 3 or 4 of these blue lights that can just do the job but not go absolutely everywhere, and then you can control them, bring them in and out, dial them up if you need them on her hair, whatever it is, independently and not reliant on just one source to do it.
If you have any questions, drop them down in the comments below. Next episode, we are delving into the world of men. Be sure to subscribe because that episode is coming in the next couple of days.